All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am really excited today to speak with Sarah Key-DeLyria. She completed her PhD at University of Florida in Communication Sciences and Disorders. She also has a background in linguistics and speech pathology. She previously has taught at Temple University and Portland State University, and currently UX researcher, quantitative UX researcher at Meta. Thank you, Sarah, for joining me today. Let's begin with a question about background. So how was your journey into UX research?
It was a very recent journey. I have been teaching at Portland State and doing research at Portland State up until May, the end of May this past year, or earlier this summer, I guess. I started exploring non-academic jobs about, I would say, like a year ago now. I kind of decided I wanted to leave in the summer of 2021, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And so I started looking into like how to decide what to do next. And gave myself a little space and permission to explore a little bit and started like figuring out how to step back from the academic stuff I was doing. And didn't know, I had never heard of UX. I had never heard of user research. And I remembered a friend of a friend had mentioned she had left speech pathology, which is my primary field, and went to work for Microsoft. And so through the friend of a friend of a friend, the way you do, I asked if it was okay if I talked with her, and she's the one that introduced me to UX research. And it's a really good fit for speech pathology, I think, because it's similarly to speech pathology, you have to kind of think of creative solutions to individual problems using larger scale data. A tricky thing in clinical research is that you have these like big group studies, but the person sitting in front of you may not match those big groups perfectly, right? So you have to be kind of creative in how you apply the problem solving that's evidence-based. And it kind of translates, interestingly, to UX research. And so she introduced me to it and got me started on a path of learning. I think everybody I talked to was sort of recommending like little Coursera courses and things, but she was the first one that said the difference that managers often look for is somebody taking like a Nielsen Norman course because they're the gold standard. So they're pricier, but not as pricey as a master's degree.
And
so
shorter too, right? And shorter
yes.
too? Yeah.
Oh yeah, like a couple hours workshop here and there. It's not a big deal.
Cool.
And I took one of those and realized, and I don't think I needed the research skills exactly. It was more that the words they use are quite different. And so I'm still in a very much a learning phase of this, but that's how I got started. Was a friend told me that it existed, and I got excited about tech because I like the idea of future thinking solutions to problems. I had already been interested in tech, just interfacing with people that need to communicate in different ways, not your typical verbal ways. So I was already loving social media for the accessibility it provides, even imperfectly. And my timing was very lucky with Meta specifically. And they were recruiting academic researchers at that point. So yeah.
Cool, great. So I want to ask you, I'm curious, I want to ask you about this observation you made about the analogy between speech pathology and case studies and UX research. So what would be, can we map there was a background of maybe lots of quantitative research, and then against that background, we have this one case or one person, one individual who has, some particular problems. Does something like that happen in UX research? Maybe the case would be a product. Is that the like a general particular relationship? How does that show up in UX research?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess what I'm thinking of is the qualitative research side of things, which really is individual focused, in-depth interviews, diary studies, things like that. But in UX research, I'm interfacing a lot with, I am doing quant work. So when I do quantitative work, that means surveys, data exploration. I keep an eye on experiments that are running because they look at behaviorally what people are doing on these different products. And you have to triangulate with qualitative researchers. So you're using this like big data from, these large scale surveys, millions of clicks, like all that sort of thing. Like, what are the percentage of clicks when we do this versus when we do this? But then translating that and figuring out how that connects to a diary study where they just like spent a week talking to 30 people. I think that's more what I have in mind. So like, you know, why did these people's clicks slow down? Well, it could be one of these 20 reasons that came up in the diary study. And I think it's really, it's kind of a powerful thing. People, when we share our like deliverables, people always want to see quotes from users. So that's sort of what I was thinking about when I was thinking about the connection.
I understand. So if I understood correctly, the quantitative part of the research provides the factual surface level observations, and then the qualitative observations are, they have their own limits, but they provide possible explanations, the causes, the deeper what's going on, and people of course love to speculate.
Speculations never ends. But yeah, somebody told me early on that the qual is more like the why. Though I'm not a qual researcher, I can't think of the other ones. But the quantitative researchers are more like what's happening, how is it happening, how often is it happening? And so if you connect those two, it can be pretty powerful.
Yeah. So that's actually, that connects with my next question I wanted to ask you. Given how big UX research is, I wanted to see how your approach to it, how your engagement with it differs from some other ways. Like, are there schools of thought in UX research? Do you like identify with, because I'm naive, so I'll ask that question. Like, are there schools of thoughts and people identify with like one school of thought or other ways? Doesn't have to be schools, but just styles of engagement.
You know, I don't know that I'm experienced enough to be able to answer this well. So I have a naive answer to this.
Great.
I literally have like less than 6 months of experience directly in industry so far.
It can be a lot. Because of how intense it can be, I imagine.
It's true. Yeah. Learning really, it's a fire hose style learning, as they say, and it's exactly what it feels like. It's no doubt good for me. But one thing I've noticed is that UX researchers communicate with the team and also with their cross-functional partners in different ways. So I think there's like people kind of build their research brand in different ways. And I know that there are probably, I think your question was probably more about big picture schools of thought, like theoretically. And I'm not experienced enough to know much about them. I've just noticed working style differences. And so I think they call them like you're more manager leaning, you're more data leaning. So I know some of my research partners will sort of sit back and wait till they're called upon in a way to like, hey, does research have any input about this problem? And other people are like up at the front trying to guide strategy, saying, you know, I think this is where the product should head because this is the big picture I'm seeing from users. So that's something I'm navigating right now. Is like, where do I fall in this? I don't know. Trying to I try on different sort of flavors of research involvement in these team decisions to see what feels right.
That is so interesting. It's almost like people have different thresholds for when they start to communicate something. Like for some people, it can be very quick and immediate. Like I have something to say, but others would wait. And like the justification has to come from outside. Like others want me to speak on this issue, so I'm going to speak. That's interesting.
It's like it makes the introvert in me feel better, but I do think the perception is quite positive. Like research will only speak if it's important, I think is one of the perceptions of the quieter ones. If that makes any introverts out there feel better.
I hope so. So are there, I know there's a lot of overlap. We already have started touching on these questions, the answer to these questions, but for people who are interested in getting into this field, are there some fundamental assumptions or things that they should know about, they should be mindful of from the get-go, that it would save them some headache or time to know about these things?
I think one thing that I see floating around, I guess it depends on who's asking that question. But I know I've been asked by people that haven't really done research before, you know, how to get into it. And I think nothing really can replace actual research training. So like, there's not going to be a quick Coursera course. Like you can't take a quick stats course and suddenly know how to do research. You need experience to do that. I'm sure you know about that. And you don't necessarily need a PhD or even a master's to know how to do research. getting involved in a lab, or, working on a related data position in a job and getting research experience that way.
Mhm.
But I think there's really nothing that can replace the research experience. So unfortunately, I don't think there's like a shortcut to UX besides getting some real hands-on research experience. I think that's something that puts people behind when they spend a lot of energy and money on some of these quick courses, and I don't know that will help them be successful.
Mhm. How about people who have research experience, but maybe do you think that sometimes we have to learn to kind of put some of our tendencies, research tendencies, out of play when it comes to industry work? Like maybe we are expected, or it's better not to be overly theoretical because we are in the industry or in an organization, we are satisfying more practical needs. And I can imagine a manager say, like, don't think too much about this. Like, for our purposes, you just we want a simpler story.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts on that? Like, do we need to like hold back on our researchers, like pure research tendencies that we have developed over time?
I yeah, yeah. I have found where I am now surprisingly scientific,
Mm.
actually. However, I do have a bias towards wanting everything to make a beautiful model together, right? I'm a cognitive science background. I want everything to like fit, like
Mhm.
cognition and language. Let's just like make it all into how do these things communicate with each other? So
Mhm.
when I start learning about these industry problems, I'm like, well, that probably relates to these 19 other things, but we don't have time for that.
Right.
I can kind of do that as we go. But
Mhm.
you're right, there are like shorter term needs. But I'm in a senior role in my current job, and so some of the questions I get to address are actually a little bit bigger picture than I expected.
Mhm.
How can we break apart our users into different segments, and what are their characteristics attitudinally? What are their motivations? What are their different behaviors? And it actually feels pretty academic. Like I can survey them, I can look at their behaviors on products, that sort of thing. And look, there's some pretty fancy model building that goes on these different behaviors. So I haven't quite figured out how to tease apart how I feel academically about it versus the need to be practical. But if you're in academia for a length of time, you've probably already had to um, translate a lot of pretty complex ideas for students.
Mhm.
And that actually feels super applicable. So when I'm working on my research, even industry research, I still am having to do a lot of that translation for people that are working on that same product. And that I wasn't expecting completely, I think. I was like, well, they're
Mhm.
working on this, so they'll know all these words. But I just spent a lot of time defining terms, explaining why we should segment users. There's an amazing amount of crossover
Mhm.
between the things I learned academically and how to communicate academic ideas. So some of the terminology is different. I've had like a crash course in corporate speak for sure, but
Mhm.
yeah, academics have like a reputation for being a little pedantic and chatty. Chatty is the wrong word, but pedantic or
Not practical.
not practical.
Mhm.
But I don't know if this is true for everybody, but I haven't felt like I've been asked to be more practical. I feel like it has felt kind of natural for me.
Mhm.
I'm coming from a clinical field, so this may be
That's right.
different for
Yeah,
me
that's
too.
right.
But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Clinical fields have a more a better grounding, I think, in reality, in the reality of day-to-day lives,
Ish.
because yeah, yeah, sure, sure, because they kind of stay connected with real problems that present
Oh,
themselves from in our natural day-to-day world, like speech pathology.
mhm.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
did have a thought. If
Go ahead.
one thing, my very first like deliverable, I shared out,
Mhm.
and I got like 50 comments and like all these shares of the people were sharing it and people were talking about it and other things, and it was like shocking to me as an academic. Like it happened
Mhm.
within hours of sharing out this product, this
Mhm.
deliverable for research outcome, and it made my academic heart beat a little faster. It's like the most engagement on a research product I've ever had.
Nice. Yeah.
That felt very different from academia. The impact is immediate, like
Right. Mhm.
within
Mhm.
hours.
And do you think the impact is for different reasons? Like, for example, in academia, people start to identify and grow attached to particular fields of research, sometimes just because their supervisor is in that field. So they kind of start to grow and identify. So the identity kind of gets invested in that field. And they start for that reason to care about the questions of that field of research. But applied research, I feel like people care about it, and it, results of that kind of research go viral or become popular, become attention grabbing or attractive for reasons that are not, like, you don't have to go through something to care about these these questions. Do you find that like it's easier to care about or communicate? Because it's not just about communicating what you did, it's also about communicating why it is important. And
Right.
in academia, it's sometimes difficult to communicate that importance part. People end up saying, "Oh, because we care about," it becomes like a
Right.
circle. Yeah.
It can be hard to, yeah, it can definitely be hard. I do get asked when I share things here, why should I care about this? They're still asking this. And even if I answer, they sometimes will ask again, like, well, that reason doesn't convince me. Do you
Right.
have other reasons? Like, give me 10 reasons why I should care. Um,
Wow, 10. Not
but
even
I
like
think,
8.
yeah, not just pull that number out of the hat. But one thing that struck me about the engagement was that people wanted a really practical takeaway. Like, I need to do this tomorrow. How will this let me do that thing? So they're like, here's a list of priority reasons that people have for not liking XYZ. So I'm going to set my next quarter's goals based on this list. So it was a weird mix of being like, oh, cool, I can make impact really fast, and also, oh, I hope I did that right, because seeing that people are basing entire project streams on something you did, it's
Yeah.
a different feeling than in academia, because you're right, people will look at it and go, this is interesting, but really it's you that will carry that research forward or not, maybe with like a collaborator or two, or in your lab, I was people were setting goals based on this that I had never really even spoke to. So it was different for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a lot we can explore about the difference between academic and non-academic research. One of them is, for example, authorship. It might be really good to do something that nobody else is doing in academia, and nobody else doesn't even maybe not at the moment find interesting or relevant, because then you have that field to yourself. But in applied research, authorship has less relevance, I think, and lots of people can gravitate towards kind of questions. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I absolutely. That's one of my favorite things in industry research, actually,
Mm-hmm.
is you are absolutely rewarded for collaboration. And so everybody is very open to it. And I love it. Like when I got into academia, I had this mental image of it being a very collaborative, open, we're all doing science together kind of place. And it really wasn't that way. It was quite
Mm-hmm.
isolating,
Yeah.
probably for some of the reasons you described, like, you're rewarded for doing things that nobody else is.
Yeah.
And you're right. Authorship doesn't matter as much, but your impact does. So showing that you did something that led to some company change matters. So it's definitely a balance. But when I reach out to people, I'll reach out and say, hey, does anybody know how to do XYZ? Or is anybody interested in working with me on this project? Multiple people will respond, sometimes within minutes,
Mm-hmm.
to help or to contribute or to plan a project together. It's really cool, and it's because
Mm-hmm.
those collaborations are rewarded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. One of the first people I had a conversation with about UX research, Kim Trang, she said that she made this observation about the size of the company, the size of the organization, and what type of UX researcher you would be. So, to put it briefly, in a relatively smaller company where you or one other person might be UX researchers, you have to be kind of a generalist and be at the intersection of UX design and UX research and kind of learn a lot about lots of things. But in a larger organization, you have the luxury, or you can afford to be more of a specialist and spend more time on like one subset of questions. So I'd like to run that by you, and also tie that to the next question, which is like, what kind of projects do you work on? how do you envision the future of your path as a UX researcher?
That's a good observation. I don't have much experience outside of Meta right now, right? So I don't. It definitely makes sense that if I was the one person UXR show, I would definitely need to pick up many more skills. And one thing here at Meta is it's expected that you'll sort of lean into your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
So if you come in and you have, a big survey background, you'll kind of lean into that and do a ton of survey work. Or if you're like, my background's cognition and people observation. So leaning more into that is something I'm working on, which is nice, but it is definitely because we have a very large team of researchers and a very collaborative. I know it's not probably as collaborative everywhere, but because we're so collaborative, I can lean into my strengths and call on somebody else if I need to do a project that requires something I'm not good at, which is reassuring. It's nice to feel like I don't have to kind of pick up a skill on the fly that I don't feel confident in. And then your other question, like, what kind of projects do I focus on? Was that what the second part was?
Sure. Yeah. To the extent that you can share. I know that there are some regulations,
right.
but
Yeah,
just
it
the
can be
type in
pretty
abstract.
general.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think when a lot of companies, I know one of the things I didn't really fully understand, still I'm working on an understanding of coming into this, what's the difference between a UX researcher and a quantitative UX researcher versus a data scientist. And one thing that I'm learning is that UX researchers are really about the people, like what's going on with the users, what is the story that they're telling us, like what are their pain points. And a quantitative researcher, usually when a company is looking for a quant researcher, they're looking for somebody that can do surveys. Depending on the company size, usually larger scale surveys. So you're running stats or running models looking at different survey designs. And if you have some ability to pull data, so a lot of places will see if you can use SQL, which is a pretty common database language, pretty simple to learn, just to, query a database and pull log information about what people are doing. So if you can connect survey results with log information, that's a lot of what I do is analyze surveys, design new surveys and run new surveys, and then pull those results and connect them to log information. And then another thing that I wasn't really super aware of before I started was segmenting users. So grouping customers or users into segments. I think a lot of companies kind of do this with demographics, but that's not super useful. Just to do age groups or race groups or something, it doesn't really tell you what people are doing. Sure. And so one of the things that quant researchers can do is help size different groups based on their attitudes, their beliefs, their motivations, their pain points. And that helps designers and it helps engineers kind of empathize with those groups. So you can say, hey, you're building for this, and you can even, you name them, right? So you're building for this group of people and here are their primary characteristics. So those are sort of the primary things I do. And it differs from data science because data science, I work really closely with data science. And there is a lot of overlap. Like we both spend a lot of time looking at log data, but I think data science spends a lot more time connecting their findings to revenue directly. And I talk about that as well when I'm sharing findings, but it's more indirect. Like I'm studying this thing because I know it has an impact on revenue, but here are my findings about this group of people.
Right.
So so they're more about revenue metrics and that sort of thing, and I'm more about connecting it to users more directly.
Yeah. Which in the long term it could be connected to revenue, but maybe not in the short term. And it's kind of like I can imagine it as you were describing. I imagine it as like taking a little detour to go gain some intel, gain some knowledge about some other aspect, and then coming back to the main road.
And if we have shared deliverables, both of those stories will be in there: the revenue story and the people story. And a data scientist said to me when I first started that the thing I can do that she can't is actually ask direct questions of people. So she can try to figure it out in the log data and she can try to connect it to revenue, but she can't just like ask the users what they think. So that's sort of the benefit of also including researchers.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your openness, for sharing your perspective. with me and my, the small group of viewers, listeners. um, I appreciate it a lot. Anything you'd like to say before we say goodbye? I mean, we will say our goodbye privately, but to the public.
I'm always happy to talk to people about user research. One thing that I have been really surprised by, I think surprised is the right word, it's just how willing people are to talk to me. When I was completely fresh, didn't even know what the field was. I didn't even know it existed. And still people that I had never met, never heard of before, I looked them up on LinkedIn or something, were willing to spend 15, 20, 30 minutes chatting with me. And I'm always happy to do that for folks. Um, and that's something, don't be shy about reaching out to people is what I would say. That was hard for me. I'm not an extrovert, but it's paid off, and people have been very kind. I've been very happy about that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I myself usually network when I don't need to, which is like, it's okay to network. It's okay to reach out to people and ask. The worst they might say is to say, no, I'm too busy. But it's, and you might find friends, which is really great. Right, Sarah, thank you very much. Let me stop the recording and we will say our goodbye.